Well, hello and welcome to our webinar from the Graduate History Learning community that focuses on peer review. And as we begin tonight, we're going to look at the peer review process with a focus on why participate in peer review and why is it beneficial to you as a writer and ultimately as a historian as you move forward within the overall discipline. So as we begin, I've identified three objectives that we'll take a look at tonight, which the first is to identify peer review. Secondly, we will examine what peer review is not. And third, we will explain how you participate in the peer review process. So as we begin, a basic definition of peer review is an evaluation of scientific, academic, or professional work by others working in the same field. So in other words, when we focus on the idea of what is peer review, we are saying that peer review is the review of another work on a historical topic. And we'll further develop this idea and this concept as we move forward. But one thing I do want to highlight at the onset regarding that basic definition of peer review is the fact that you are not an expert on every topic in history, and you are not necessarily going to have a thorough background in the topics in which you're reviewing, and that is okay. So as we move forward, do keep that idea in mind as we talk about what peer review is and placing that focus on that phrase in the same field. Now, there are other ways to look at peer review, and there's a couple of things we want to keep in mind regarding what peer review is. First of all, it is a central role in the review process. Peer review is something that should be welcomed because you are going to get that valuable feedback from peers within the overall discipline. If it's peer review for a class, for example, you'll be getting that review and that assistance related to looking over your work from your classmates. While moving out into the discipline, it will also be part of a scholarly review, in which you're going to be receiving that feedback from other scholars within the discipline as it relates to ultimately making your work better. Because when we look at peer review, we do want to keep in mind that if you are the reviewer, you are providing constructive feedback to your peers. And that focuses on the word constructive because it is ultimately focusing on making the work better. If you are the reviewee, in other words, your work has been reviewed, you are receiving constructive feedback from your peers. So you can be on one side, which is to provide, and the other side, which is to receive, and the ultimate goal is to make sure that you are helping the person in which you're reading their work, or you are being helped by having your work read. So a couple ideas to keep in mind there. And we also want to reference the idea that peer review is a quality control process, allowing you to have that extra set of eyes because we are always seeking to make our work better. So when we look at these early ideas and the differing ways in which we can look at peer review, it's important to note it plays a very valuable role within the writing process. And it is something that should not be overlooked, something that should not be identified or viewed as irrelevant because it does play a pivotal role. Now, what peer review is not, and this is very important because we can say, what it is and how important it is, and I don't want to overlook what it is not, because if you are providing the review, you want to make sure that you have a solid understanding of these, but at the same time, if you're receiving it, you don't want to take that work personally, the comments personally, because always keep in mind that the work is being reviewed and not the author. So what peer review is not? Well, it's not harsh criticism. It is meant to ultimately make that work better, as I referenced. It is not a waste of time. It is not unnecessary. As I referenced, it is not a personal attack on the author. And that's very, very important to note because, as I just mentioned, it's the work that's under review, not the author. And as a note, we do want to keep in mind, circling back to this idea that I referenced as we were beginning, that you do not need to be an expert on the topic to provide peer review. You are looking at the overall content that's present. You are looking at the arguments that have been made. You are looking at the source analysis that's been provided within the work. So therefore, you are a reader of the work. You are looking at that work to see, did the author do what they said they're going to do? You're not a historian related to that particular topic, and that is okay. Now, how do you provide peer review right now? Well, there's multiple ways you do it each and every day in your current courses. For example, in the discussion board. You are ultimately providing what I would call a very low level amount of peer review because you are analyzing what's been presented, you are developing ideas related from it, and you're engaging with your classmates. That is peer review. You can also provide peer review in a formal assignment. Maybe peer review is part of your final research project for your current course. If that's the case, you will provide peer review as it relates to that particular assignment requirement. And that is work in which you will identify, look at the source analysis that's been provided. You're going to look at the thesis of the work. If it's a research proposal, you're going to focus on the research question. Did the author do what they said they are going to do? It can also be part of a review process related to a larger project. Sometimes if you get into a large research project that might be related to a specific type of funding or whatever the case may be, as you move out into the discipline, it will require an element of peer review. So you'll want to obviously participate in that process. You can also participate and provide peer review by looking and providing meaningful and substantial feedback related to the work that is under review. And at the end of the day, that is exactly what peer review is. Substantial feedback related to the work that is under review. Now, what is substantial feedback? And that's very important to note because when we look at peer review, we will also want to keep in mind how you will provide it and when you will provide it. Well, as I referenced, as a student throughout your MA program. If it's in your current course or maybe, like I said, that low-level element of peer review and a discussion board. Perfect ways in which to do it and become engaged within that process. You will also complete it as a professional historian. It could be book reviews for publication, comments on conference presentations, evaluating grant proposals, or everyday conversations with your colleagues. Because what's going to happen as you move out into the discipline, you're going to be working around your colleagues each and every day. And you're going to be seeking input. You're going to be seeking guidance. You're going to be asking questions. That is elements of peer review. And I highlight these differing ways in which peer review can be provided because it's important to note of the different roles it plays in your work. It's not a foreign concept, and we don't want it to be a foreign concept. We want it to be something that you view as being helpful to you and a vital part of that research process. Now, how do you provide peer review? Well, as a reviewer, you're going to take time to read through the submission thoroughly, and you're going to need to read it more than one time. I would definitely suggest very first overview that you provide, the first reading, is nothing more than just to familiarize yourself with the work. Sit down and read it. Maybe jot down a few ideas if you want to in the margins as you're reading, or maybe read it and jot down a few ideas at the end. What were your key takeaways? And then you're going to go back and read it a second time, even a third time. Take time to develop your critique, okay? And remember, when we talk critique, you are critiquing the piece, not the person. Your goal is to help the author achieve his or her goal that they've set out to do in their thesis. Okay, you will not make any type of judgment about the subject matter. That's not the purpose of peer review. Okay, you have to remember, providing peer review, that you may not be the intended audience for the piece. That's okay. But you're going to provide an analysis as though you are the intended audience and do it to the best of your ability, keeping that focus on the fact that you are not critiquing the person, but the piece of work that is under review. You will also want to make sure that you use any objectives if it's related to an assignment or, like I referenced earlier, maybe part of a research proposal, whatever the case may be. You're going to use those objectives to focus your critique because you want to make sure that you are providing the necessary feedback related to the overall work. The critique should start with the strengths of the piece, what works and why. Provide concrete examples. You want to make sure that you highlight what is present and how you noted the fact that it was present. You also want to review the paper that is written, not the paper you think the author should have written. And this is, again, going back to that idea of maintaining our focus on the overall work that is presented. You're also going to want to suggest areas for revision. Keep the tone positive, but provide concrete suggestions for revision. Be very clear and specific to the author of the work, what you're referencing, so that they have no issues incorporating your feedback into their work. Your final comment should be an overall summary of the piece. and it should focus on the positive. Very important to note, being positive, providing a critique of the work, not the person. As an author, after receiving peer review, you want to listen to or read, depending upon how it's provided, the critique of your rough draft submission. If it was for a rough draft or whatever was submitted for peer review, and read it carefully. And on your initial reading, you want to avoid any desire to defend your choices. If you're unclear what the reviewer means, ask him or her to clarify. It's perfectly normal to have questions about something that was referenced. You might have a few questions just simply after reading the work, not necessarily for clarification, but pose those questions to the reviewer as well. You might be concerned if your submission is confusing, not quite appropriate to the subject, or not relevant. How are you going to know that if you don't ask questions? You also want to maybe take special note of repeated commentary on the same issue. This is very important. If you receive a couple different peer reviews and you have reviewers making the same references to like a particular section of your paper or a particular element of your work, definitely take note of that. Or if you had one review done and the author is making repeated references to an issue that's present and it's surrounding that same larger concept, take note of that. This might signify an area for improvement. Now, what is important to note is the fact that we want to reference back to this concept of meaningful and substantial feedback. In providing a review or receiving a review, we want to make sure that we're not only focused on ideas such as grammar. You're not a proofreader. You are a peer reviewer. And that's very, very important, because if you're the one providing the review, the author receiving that review is going to want to look at how to incorporate these ideas as it relates to, as I referenced, the source analysis, all those elements into the work. So very important to have that meaningful and substantial feedback that you as the author have the ability to incorporate into the review. Now also, as receiving peer review, again, don't take the critique personally. It's an evaluation of the paper, not you. You also want to always thank the reviewer for the feedback. There's going to be elements in which might be particularly helpful. Highlight those. Let the reviewer, know what was helpful. Also keep in mind that you are the ultimate decision maker on what goes into the piece. You as the author of the work do not have to accept the peer review feedback as it relates to incorporating it into your final work. However, you do not want to outright just dismiss any type of feedback that's provided. You don't want to assume that this is just a process you have to go through. So, yes, I had the peer review done. Now I have my comments. I'm good to go. I'm submitting my work anyhow. No, review the peer review and take those ideas to mind. Keep a focus on what was said and will it improve your overall work. Very important to note. And it is possible that your work will be even better after receiving the peer review and incorporating it than what you had originally submitted and thought. So keep an open mind when you receive the feedback, because you will be very, very surprised at how it might make your work even better. In terms of what to do with peer review, welcome suggestions and feedback. Always keep in mind that the purpose is to make your project and writing even better. That's our ultimate goal. Follow the guidelines. Are there elements that do need to be incorporated into a final project? If it's related to a course assignment, for example, yes, you might be the ultimate final authority on what goes into your work, but is this going to be needed and to be included into that final draft as well? So make sure that you're familiar as the author with your assignment requirements if it's an academic program and you're receiving the peer review. And you'll also want to do the same if it is in that formal conference setting or for a publication. I would like to thank you for taking the time to view this information on peer review. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact your instructor. They are more than happy to assist. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.